Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending another Lunch and Learn from CAD Dimensions. This is Kevin Holbrook. Today our topic is kind of more of a broad idea about creating standard files and organizing file references or options within Solidworks to make sure that you can share across your teams. I also want to kind of demystify some of the standards like Toolbox, Material Library, templates, and just talk about some of the concerns related to those particular items. And then at the end today, we'll open it up to some questions. But before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping issues. If you have any questions during the presentation, please post them in the question section of the GoToWebinar window. I do not look at the chat as we go along. This session is somewhat loose. It was suggested that I show our customers how I'm organizing my SolidWorks data and give you some insight as to how you might be able to implement that at your facility. So that's what I'm going to do today. Our agenda is as follows. We're going to talk about getting organized with all of your standard files inside of SolidWorks. We're going to go a little bit more in depth on a few of these, and then I'll open it up at the end if there's any other particular file type or format that we want to talk more about. We'll take that in the questions. But getting organized as a whole, how do I go about wrapping my arms around all the things that SolidWorks has us reference for default templates and file formats and all these file paths that seemingly SolidWorks puts in all these different places, and you kind of take the out of the box and never really do any customization because it's hard to understand where everything is. We'll talk about Toolbox and the whole wizard. There's some, I won't call them issues, but some rules as far as making any customizations and any extra efforts in Toolbox and whole wizard that we can clear up a little bit today. I want to talk about organizing your design library, where it's stored, those types of things. Real brief discussion on templates, templates and sheet formats for that matter, and just some of the organization of that, material libraries, and then other files. And again, if you have any questions at the end about a particular file format, I think it's important to do that. Before we go any further, I just want to have a few other polls here. I just want to find out how many of you have attended Lunch and Learns in the past. If you could go ahead and answer the poll here. See if there's any new Lunch and Learn users online here. Looks like there actually is. So just to share this with you. For those of you who have not attended Lunch and Learns, they're formatted in such a way that we try to learn a little bit about how to go about things, more of a training session, not a sales session by any means, to really discuss different areas of the software and different ideas on how to work. I kind of, it's almost like a user group. We just sit down and discuss certain things here. A couple things related to today's topic. How are you handling standard files in SolidWorks at your company today? Couple ways. Do you have a shared library that is shared across the entire team and everyone is using the same set of files? Go ahead and vote on that. Let's see where we're at, and this will play a big role. All right, almost there. Go ahead and close that. So this is kind of why this has become a topic. Only 30% of you are sharing a library with the entire team. And I'm guessing that library doesn't have all the files that SolidWorks utilizes in its reference paths. Things like table templates, obviously regular SOLIDWORks templates are typically shared or should be shared, but like table templates, whole wizard formats, callout formats, things like that that can be customized to match your own internal usage typically are not being stored. So that's kind of where this topic came into play today. I want to find out a little bit about Toolbox. Are you using Toolbox today? If you are, just to give me a sense of what kind of cross-section we do have. I understand there's different uses of Toolbox. We can use it as a document creator or use it as a tool to manage all of the Toolbox files. If you're not using Toolbox, sometimes it's related to how Toolbox is set up and how it's managed going forward. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. You can see most of you are not using Toolbox, so maybe I won't spend as much time on that today. So let's just talk about getting organized. One of my frustrations is the fact that SOLIDWORks seems to store a lot of the standard data that it needs in various locations within the software. One prominent location is your SOLIDWORks install directory, lang English, and you'll find a bunch of text files, a bunch of other data in there that's utilized by the system. The problem is everyone has their own, and if adjustments get made to things like bend tables or whole callout format files, it's only for one person to utilize, and I think it's super important to bring all of those file paths into a single location. I'm going to give you kind of a view into what I have today. I would suggest placing them on the server and getting what we call a librarian. Having somebody within your facility be the point person for adding files to this system. So somebody has to set it up initially, but when somebody wants to add something to the design library or wants to add a new bend table, that somebody is the point person to go ahead and do that later on. So let's just take a look at what I've done on my system today to organize the data. Now, I have all my documents stored in one particular location on a drive, but what I've done is I've taken and created a folder called the SOLIDWORks library. Now, this library has a series of folders within it that coincide with the paths that SOLIDWORks is looking for. Now, let me explain that further. If I go to my Tools Options, under File Locations, this is where the software points to folders that contain particular documents. You can see that the paths under the Show Folders for actually will match what I have here. So the first thing I did is I went into SOLIDWORks and I said, what folders is SOLIDWORks looking for as far as file types? So these match everything listed in there. Now I added some other things in here. You can see that I have brought my toolbox and whole wizard. Some of the other tools can also be brought in here. I have composer data in here as well. So that's the first step, is really creating the folder structure that you need. The second step is moving all of that data from the default location to the library. Now, things like this, my SOLIDWORks library really only contained this dull, shiny, and standard. The rest of the stuff I may have gotten in other locations, but I'm able to go to the default location that SOLIDWORks specifies and copy the files, which in this case were my color swatches, copy them to my new library under color swatches. So this is what the very first setup of the library will have to be done, is you'll have to gather up all the default SOLIDWORks files. Now there's a lot of them, and it takes a good hour to kind of go through that. For instance, like the whole callout format file, there's multiples of them. And these are from previous releases of SOLIDWORks. So how do I go about doing that? Now, mine's going to look a little different here because as I'm selecting the items, you can see everything is pointing to my library. And in your case, this will be a shared server location. You're going to want to just go through one by one before you ever change any paths, and make sure you don't change the paths. So you might come here to your bend table template folder, and this will give you a path. Go right to that path, and you're going to find all your bend table templates, and you're simply going to do a copy and paste to your bend table template folder here. Okay, so it's important to grab everything that SOLIDWORKS has initially and move it over into this library format. And I'll be glad to send you the folder structure as I have it today, maybe without all the files, because I think my design library is a pretty good size at this point. But this will allow you to create a standard library with everything that SOLIDWORKS uses. And this allows you, if you want to make changes to any table templates, it's shared. If you're making changes to a spelling folder or a dictionary, it's shared. A material library, it's shared. I think this is one of the deficiencies of out-of-the-box SOLIDWORKS, is managing the shared file formats. So my suggestion is to kind of get organized and place them on the server by creating those folders. Now, the whole idea of a librarian is just for your own protection or for your own awareness of a file. If you have a librarian, a go-to person that can manage the files that are entering these folders once you set up the initial setup here, it makes it easy to make sure that when a file enters into the library that people are aware of it and they can utilize it. Now, here's one suggestion that I had, is that maybe within your SOLIDWORKS library series of folders, as I have here, you create a folder called the Pending Librarian. And in this Pending Librarian folder, any new files that are needed to be added to the standard folders can be placed in here and then moved by the librarian to the SOLIDWORKS library. Okay, so that's kind of step number one, is to really take a look at how you can get organized with the standards. Now, some of the standard files are a little bit harder to manage. It's a little bit more than a path. And I'm going to discuss Toolbox just because I want to kind of take some of the mystique out of how it actually works and what happens and why you have issues with Toolbox. And if we can standardize on a location and a way of sharing Toolbox, I think it can be better utilized across an organization. Now, one of the other issues that comes up is, how do I customize it? How do I add my own data to it? How do I do backups? So I want to talk a little bit about that today. So if we go back to my folder system, you'll notice that I have my Toolbox and Whole Wizard data in there as well. Now, most of you are going to have your Whole Wizard and Toolbox data at the default location. And you can find that in your system options under Whole Wizard Toolbox. I think it's standard like C SOLIDWORKS data, and you'll find the data within that. You can see that mine is pointing to the library path that contains my Whole Wizard and Toolbox data. But let's go into that data just to get an idea of what's really in here. The first thing is the browser. The browser is the actual SOLIDWORKS files. Okay, they're organized by standard. There's an index which you can open this up in Word. It just really is a big list of all the different files that are listed in the folder structures within them. And if I kind of narrow down in here, I can go to bolts and screws, hex head, and you'll find one file for each type of fastener within the browser portion of Toolbox. Now, the reason there's one file is because all of the various sizes of each file are controlled by a database. Now that database, if I take you back to my root of my toolbox here for a moment, is located under Lang, English, and you'll see the swbrowser.mdb file. You can see it's about a 95 meg file. This contains all the sizes that come standard with this release of Toolbox. Now, a couple other things that we can look at here. First of all, there's a Toolbox version file. If you ever want to know what version of Toolbox and whether your Toolbox has ever been upgraded to the latest version. Now, what does that mean to be upgraded? It doesn't mean necessarily that the files are upgraded. What it means is if they've added new fasteners, different sizes, and made any adjustments to maybe they had a wrong or incorrect size, that it's been updated, your database has been updated, and your files have been updated. If you open this file with Notepad, okay, you can actually see what version you're actually running of Toolbox. Toolbox version 2014 SP4. Now, again, what you want to do is make sure that everyone in your organization is using the same Toolbox. Now, there is a section in here for updates, and what this actually is when you perform an update on Toolbox, these are the installation files that actually do the updating of the Toolbox data, so they're really not anything you're going to utilize at this point. There's a folder called Copy Parts. This is for some setup information within Toolbox. I'll talk more about that in a moment. It's very simple how it's laid out at this point. Now, the reason why there's so many problems managing the standard Toolbox data is because of the way that it creates the fasteners. When you decide to grab a heavy hex bolt and you pick a particular size, by default, the software is going to go into this file, open it up, and create a configuration. Now, the problem is when the next person opens up that same assembly on their machine, it's going to look into their Toolbox for data. And if their heavy hex bolt doesn't have that same configuration, it takes the default size, which happens to be the largest. This is by far the biggest reason why people do not use Toolbox. So my discussion today as part of this is to standardize on Toolbox and get it into a central location, make sure that everyone has the standard folder set up, and when you do major releases of Solidworks, you're going to be backing up and upgrading this folder. Once you set it up this way, it's important for you to manage this data just as importantly as your default Solidworks assemblies. This Solidworks data folder should be backed up regularly. Before any upgrades, it gets backed up just like any other Solidworks file. So you're going to ask your IT staff to back this up. Now, it makes it easier when you create this Solidworks library because everything in here should be backed up on a regular basis so you don't lose anything. So bringing Toolbox and Whole Wizard in there is important. Now, back to the options for Whole Wizard and Toolbox, and I've it's lumped together in here, Whole Wizard and Toolbox, because the database contains the Whole Wizard holes as well. You'll notice in here there's an option to configure your Toolbox, and I'm going to go ahead and launch that so you can see that. This is really another part of creating standards for your organization, is to set up what it is you're going to use within Toolbox. Now, I have a question. I'm going to bounce to this now because it pertains to Toolbox specifically. When Solidworks updates and Toolbox is updated also, will it automatically update to your path? The answer is really dependent on when you do your install locally, it asks you where your Toolbox path is. If you specify the server path, it will update the Toolbox files on the server, like the update folder. But what happens is a lot of times when you perform an upgrade or a change, you end up going back to using a Toolbox on your local system. So anytime you perform an upgrade or change, you just want to confirm, first of all, that your path is still pointing to the server, and second of all, you're going to go out to the server and check your updates or version number and make sure that it matches the current version and service pack that you're using. But if your upgrade is performed and you point to the Toolbox folder on the server, it will update that Toolbox folder on the server. So you only need to do that one time, and that will be done. So let's just go a little bit deeper into Toolbox here for a moment, because some things to help you create a standard environment within Toolbox. The first section of the configure is for Whole Wizard. Now I think it's important, at least initially when you're starting to work with Toolbox, to eliminate the things that you're not going to use. So everything is organized by standard in here, and you have the ability to turn off standards that you won't use. If you're not doing PCS and Haskell metric hole sizes, because you're not in the mold industry, you may be able to turn that data off. Now this allows you to take those standards and do a little bit more to it. Now if we take a look at the standard, and I can go all the way into my hex bolt, in this case, I bury down in the standard, I can actually see whether or not individual Whole Wizard holes are enabled. Now this may be a little bit too customized right up front, but you have the ability to go ahead and enable or turn on and off different counterbore hole sizes that you want to be available. Now you'll notice in here there's an option to add a new size. Now here's a gotcha. If I hit add a new size, it's not going to work because you're modifying an existing standard. What we have to do to create a new size is actually copy the existing standard and make some changes. So let's say I wanted to create a new hex bolt size. I would go to my ANSI inch standard. You'll find an option here to copy the standard. I'll just call this Kevin Test. And then it will create a new standard, another set of fastener or Whole Wizard sizes in the database. And then that I can go ahead and add any sizes that I want to that. Now this may take just a few seconds. Now once this is complete, you'll notice that I will have my own standard at the bottom here. I can go into my counterbore hold, my hex bolt, and now I have the ability to add in the sizes will stick within this. Okay, all the thread data, the screw clearances, they're all in there and can be modified from here, but only on your own standards. Now going through Toolbox a little bit further, just to show you, it does have the same methods for customizing hardware when it comes to the actual hardware you're going to place in. If I want to modify any of the standard sizes of the hardware, I'll have to do the same thing. I have to copy my standard. What you can do within Toolbox with the fasteners is you can start to modify some of the custom property data. Now some of this stuff is set in the database, but things like part number, description, comment, you can give a customized part number for each size. I can give a customized color for a particular fastener. All fasteners will be a particular color. So I guess the story is not really about all the things you can do to configure Toolbox, but just the fact that you have to create your own standard to make some modifications, and you want to share it. You want to put it out on that shared location for everyone to use. So that's your configure Toolbox here for a moment. Now let's just bounce back. Talk a little bit about the design library. Now this is probably the most useful piece of Solidworks that is underutilized from a file path perspective. I see all the time everyone has their own design library. Now why would I want to share something in a library if it's only shared with myself? So you tend not to put stuff in there when it comes to the design library. Now there's a lot of customization that can be done here. How do we back up this data? It's very similar in nature than what we were talking about before. But if we go ahead and look, what I have is my design library. I just moved everything from the default location out to, again, this folder area. And that allows me to organize everything just as you saw there. If I wanted to create new folders, I can create new folders. If I wanted to create subfolders, I could. You can see even under my routing, I have all sorts of stuff under my pipe routing that maybe doesn't come with the defaults, because I've set up a custom design library that has gaskets and shared data. Now let's go into Solidworks for a moment, because it's very simple to make sure that this path change exists. This is probably the hardest of the Solidworks paths to keep updated from year to year. What I'm really trying to say there is when I initially create a shared design library, my initial intent is to take all the Solidworks design library defaults and copy them to the server. Well, next year they may come out with a new feature within the design library. You have to go and copy that from the installed library to the one on the server. So it makes it a little bit harder to keep it matching what Solidworks defaults are. But to add the design library to your tab within Solidworks on the task pane, all there is a add file location option where you specify the folder on which the design library resides. And you can see that mine is D Kevin Documents Solidworks Library. I did keep the default in here just so you can see that there is some variation between theirs and mine. Okay, but the design libraries, again, another one of those pieces you want to manage and work within this shared content. Just a brief conversation on templates. Really, there's two pieces of templates that I think one of them gets left behind a little bit. With a template's made up of two pieces. You have a piece of paper, and then you have a sheet format on top of that paper. When you put the two of them together, that's what makes a Solidworks template. If you don't manage both pieces, you lose flexibility. Let's talk a little bit about that. If I go into Solidworks here, let's create a new drawing. Okay, when I create a new drawing from a template, it asks me or automatically pulls up a sheet format that goes along with it. Now, it also gives you an option to browse to a sheet format. This is where I can go into my library. Again, it goes right into my Solidworks library, and I can swap out the title block. I can swap out all of the table data on the template itself. But unless you're managing both the sheet formats and the templates, you're going to not have the ability to swap these things out. Okay. Again, going back to my library, it's very simple. I have a sheet format folder where I have all of these different formats that go on the drawing. And then I have a template folder. I think it's under custom templates. Somewhere in here. One of these are document templates. So here's all my templates that are looking for that data as well. So that is kind of another piece of standardizing it, but I wanted to just bring up the fact that you want to make sure you're managing both, and again, those are shared on the server. You can see from mine, I have all sorts of templates in different units. I have sheet metal templates that have different note styles and different units as well. Next thing I want to talk about, I think this is one of the file locations that probably gets the most use as far as sharing, and that's the material library. The library is very simple. There's one file out of the box that gets installed in the SolidWorks directory. If you modify that library in any way by adding your own custom materials, you've only done that for yourself. So again, this conversation about sharing, if we can move the material libraries out to the server and share, then any time somebody puts an exotic grade of steel in there, that it's shared. You can utilize it later. So I want to just talk a little bit about how to customize the library, what the file format is, and how to get maybe some web-based data, what some of the options are for that inside of SolidWorks. So let's go back for a moment. I'll open up a part here. Let's get out of there. And we'll open this up. Now our material library is organized with colored folders. And each of these colored folders could be pointing to a different library. If I were to right-click on any of these folders and I select Open Library, you can see that it's trying to open a material database. This is the format that SolidWorks uses, SLDMAT. Now, if I want to see where that is located, I would just go to my file locations, and I can see that this is located. This one happens to be in my program files. This one is as well. So these are the two default, and it looks like I haven't pointed all. There's one from my library, my custom materials. The folders do mean something, though, in the material libraries. The first two folders, being yellow, are two libraries that are specific to SolidWorks and are not editable by the end user. In other words, I can't come in here, find a aluminum alloy, and start modifying the properties. It just won't allow me to make any changes. So the SolidWorks libraries, the ones that come out of the box, are kind of locked in. Okay. From there, you may have some libraries that are specific to sustainability if you have that product. You can see that mine do show sustainability libraries. Those will show up in green. When you click on them, there's nothing you can really do here except check for updates. This has limited information in here, but these are all from sustainability, the product for green design. But below that, we have any custom materials, custom libraries. This is where you'll want to create your own custom library for your own use. Okay? So if we want to create a new library, we could just right-click on any one of these custom folders. And you notice it takes me to a file path where it wants it to be stored. Now, mine's a little bit disjoined at this point. You can see it's going to my custom materials folder, but I would take that right to my library as well, and I should have material databases, and you can see that I have these other databases in here as well. One of them I got right off the web. Okay, so you save that material database into that directory. Now once you do that, you're going to have the ability to create your own structure for those materials as well. Now let's say I wanted a material based upon an existing 6061 material that we have. What I could do is actually copy the material, go down to my custom material database, and I can add a new category. I'll call this aluminum. And then once I create the category, I can go ahead and paste the material below it. Once I paste the material, I'm going to have the ability to rename it. Okay, whatever I want to rename it. And then I can go ahead and modify any mechanical properties. But again, to follow our conversation, adding this once in the server is going to allow you to share the material information. Now there's also web-based information. I think I got this off GrabCAD. So GrabCAD, if you've never been there, the grabcad.com has all sorts of resources from other users that are putting CAD data out there. Now, it's kind of like 3D Content Central, except it's multi-CAD for multiple CAD systems. But in the sense of SolidWorks, it had an entire library for exotic materials, aviation materials, I think this was. So I was able to grab, there's a bunch of tungsten alloys and titanium alloys and different materials right off the web. So I do suggest you look for that data. One other thing I did want to show while I was in here as far as creating standards, if you've ever been to MatWeb, there's a location on MatWeb if you're a premium customer only, but where you can actually export out using export to SolidWorks option a bunch of materials, and it comes out in the SLD MAT format, and you can save those directly to your existing material library. Okay, so this is very simple. Just Google search SolidWorks and MatWeb, and you'll end up with this page that shows you how to go out and get some of that data. Okay. So when you look at this, I mean, I've only touched on a few file formats within file locations, but there's 50 of them. There's quite a few. And every one of them has its own file format. Some of them are text files. Some of them are Excel files. Some of them have their own SolidWorks format, like BOM templates. It's a SLD BOM TBT, a SolidWorks BOM table template. So, you know, this same process we've been talking about can be carried on with all of these. As far as managing data, they all have their unique experience as far as, you know, how to manage them or create your own customized piece. But once you create the library, I think you're already further along as far as managing all that data going forward. So with that, I know this was more of a high level, what are you doing, how can you do it kind of thing. I want to just kind of open this up to questions about a particular file format, a particular file location that you may be concerned with. If you could just post any questions in the question section, I'll be glad to answer them now. I have one right now. I use SolidWorks while connected to our company's servers and also off locations not connected to the network. How will this affect using a standard SolidWorks library, including Toolbox and WholeWizard? That's a great question. Now, there's a couple approaches to answering this. If we look at out-of-the-box SolidWorks, and I'm pointing to a server location for a lot of standard information, as soon as you disconnect from the server, you lose your access to that data. This is not the optimal way of doing this, but you know, one way, you're always going to have to copy the data locally anyway if you're going to move off-site. Really, the best answer to this question comes when you have EPDM in place, because Enterprise PDM, the data management system, can actually automatically cache all of your library files on your system when you log in, so that when you do disconnect, you actually have a copy on your machine that you don't have to worry about being up to date. Now, the alternative, if you don't have EPDM, is that you're going to have to make a copy of that entire library to your local machine so you have access to it. It doesn't hurt you a whole lot in the sense that a lot of our file locations are not direct references, with the exception of Toolbox. In other words, if I use a table template and I don't need to have the original table template to send that to someone else. But if I use Toolbox, I need the original Toolbox file because that's where the configuration is stored. So my suggestion is to either look at EPDM, or it would require being very diligent and making a copy of the library prior to getting disconnected. But you want to ensure that once you come back that you disconnect completely and delete your local library and continue to use the updated library on the server. The other part of that, which makes it very hard, is you have to adjust all your paths. If you copy your library locally, you will have to look at your path updates as well and make sure that they get updated along the way. But that's kind of simple to do in a sense that we can copy out all of our tools options and reassign our paths once we connect and disconnect. But the quickest answer is Enterprise PDM. So any other questions on any other file format inside of SolidWorks? Does it make sense as far as setting up a library? Okay, if I don't have any more questions, I hope this was at least insightful. I know we didn't go in depth in a lot of the formats. We could spend probably an entire day going through each one of those. But I would say if you don't have the library, start today. Create those folders, start copying files, and share it with your coworkers. Get everything out of the install. Don't be using any of those paths because you never know when they're going to be overwritten. You never know when you're going to have an issue of files that disappear. So thank you for joining me today, and hopefully